Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful, creepy human being you, and welcome to today's true crime episode. I am so happy that you are here. I am so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day today, today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or BRATTERSTEIN, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the murder of Venus Stewart. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. Now, before we get into the details of today's case, I first need to say a big thank you to the sponsor of today's video, and that is Dossier. If you've been here a while, you know that Dossier is a fragrance company that creates luxury scents, but at a fraction of the luxury price point. Where most luxury perfumes can cost anywhere from $50 to hundreds of dollars, Dossier's perfumes range anywhere from $29 to $49. My tongue stopped working. And they have so many different ways that you can save additional money on top of the fact that the perfumes and other scent products that they have in their range are so affordable. They offer bulk deals with up to 25% off and also offer free shipping for 3 or more bottles, which is a deal that sounds too good to be true, but I promise you it's not. This is real life. So today I have these 2 fragrances that I wanted to show you today to feature and give you an idea of what they have to offer. And these are both from the Dossier Originals line, which has turned out to be one of my favorite things that they offer. So the first one I wanted to show you today is Fruits of Love. This is a fruity and floral scent from their Icons collection. And the other one I have here is their scent Winter's Kiss, which is from their Seasons collection, which, hence the winter of it all. And this scent, okay, this is great. Love you so much. This scent, though, could not have come at a better time because though it is already February, California and LA in particular is just now starting to get cold. So this scent is bringing all of the vibes, the warm, hot cocoa-y vibes to the party. And I'm here for vibes and vibrations always. So offering wonderful scents is a great thing and arguably one of the most important selling points when it comes to a perfume company, right? But there are a lot of perfume companies. So what is it that sets Dossier apart for me? Well, one of the main things is that they are a cruelty-free fragrance company, and most fragrance companies aren't. In fact, most luxury companies across the board just aren't. So if you love animals as much as I do, this could be a good fit for you. And on top of that, they are a fraction of the price, which I don't know about you, but that is a big selling point for me personally. With all of that said, Dossier is offering members of the Brat Pack 10% off of their order for a limited time. And they're already so affordable. There's so many ways that you can save money and you could add that 10% off on top of it. And all you have to do is click the link in my description box and use the code BRATTERSTEIN at checkout. So if all that sounds as good to you as it does to me, make sure to click the link in the top of my description box to let them know I'm the one that sent you and pick up your new favorite perfume or perfumes or a candle or a diffuser today. Now, I just want to say a big thank you to Dossier for partnering with me on today's video. It's partners like Dossier that make it possible for me to put out videos as consistently as I do. And a big thank you to you guys for always being so supportive of all of my sponsors. You rock, don't ever change. With that, let's go ahead and get into this video. Now, this video is on a case that was recommended to me by a member of the Brat Pack named Adrian. Hi, Adrian. Thank you, Adrian. And I went back and I searched and I saw that Adrian actually requested this case a number of times. And I can see why, because in looking into this case, it's so, well, first off, absolutely tragic. The senselessness and audacity of this murder really got to me. And another thing that really got to me when reading about this was just the planning of this murder. Venus's killer had a plan. I'll give them that. They had a plan that was even unique, inventive, something I have not heard before. And they may have even gotten away with it if it weren't for some really stupid oversights. And that's terrifying. And I'm so glad that they didn't, because Venus's family deserved answers. And I know I'm being a little bit vague here on the details, but that's because we're about to get into it. So today I'm going to tell you the entire story. I read all the things so that you do not have to. And at the end of this video, I want you to answer the question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around in your brain as we go through the details of this case. But of course, I want you to answer once we have something to go on. But the question of the day is this: how does a person convince another person, a reportedly normal person, young person, no criminal record type of person, to help them get away with committing a murder? There's some more vague foreshadowing there, but you'll understand once we get to the end, and I want you to answer once you have the information to go on. But that's the question of the day. How does that happen? And now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the murder of Venus Stewart. Now, I was thinking about this and I was wondering where to begin this case because there really is so much to go through. But I think the best thing we can do is jump in our handy dandy time machine and we're going to head to April 26, 2010, and it's at about 6 a.m. This is where a woman named Therese McComb was leaving her Michigan home to go to work in the morning. On her way out, she saw her daughter Venus. She told her goodbye. It was a totally normal exchange, totally normal morning, except this would be the last time that Therese would ever see her daughter. About 2 hours later, Therese's husband, Venus's father, Larry, he wakes up, and he wakes up in kind of a grumpy mood because he was a truck driver. So he was trying to sleep off like a long night of work, and he was woken up at this time by noise. And this was the second time he had been woken up. He was woken up at like 7:45 a.m. to the sound of his dog barking. He got the dog quiet. He went back to bed, and now he's being woke up again by the sound of Venus's daughters. They were 3 and 5 at the time, and they were, being all types of kids, being young children / toddlers, 3 and 5. And he goes out wanting to just see if maybe like people could be a little quiet. Maybe we could have a little quiet time. Maybe we could watch a smidge of Miss Rachel and just let me get a little bit of sleep. But when he came out of the room, he realized that the kids were there, but Venus wasn't. So he asked the girls, like, where's your mom? And they're like, I don't know. I'm just a kid. So he's like, okay. And he starts looking for her. He goes downstairs thinking maybe she's doing laundry, but she's not there. So he goes out front and she's not there. But he does notice something weird when he goes out front. Because you know how, I'm not familiar with like landscaping lingo, but when there's like a bunch of little rocks out in the front for like decor, for vibes and vibrations, my baby's favorite part of any walk that we go on, all the little pebbles. Well, he noticed that the rocks were like strewn about a little bit and that there were indentations like all the way down to the dirt beneath the rocks. Like it looked like somebody had been dragged, which was obviously concerning, seeing as Venus was missing. So he immediately calls his wife. Panic is setting in. She's at work. She tells them that she needs to leave, even though they try to calm her down at work. And they're like, oh, don't worry about it. Maybe she just went out for like a walk around the block and she's going to be right back. And Therese in her mind's like, that's real dumb. Like, I know my kid. She would never, ever do something like that. So she leaves. She goes home and the cops were called. The first responding officer was a guy named Trooper Aaron Steensma. Trooper Aaron. And when he got there, he said it was clear right away that something was not right. He was like, okay, there's this 32-year-old woman who just 2 hours before this was seen by her mother in her pajamas, like these little pajamas. She wasn't planning on going anywhere. She didn't seem like she was intending to leave. And now she's just gone and she didn't take anything. She didn't take her phone. She didn't take her keys. She didn't take her purse. She didn't take her kids. And now she's just disappeared and there's a sign of a struggle in the front yard. Like, this doesn't look right. So that already looks weird. But on top of that, as soon as he got there, Therese, Venus's mother, who was clearly in hysterics, was just crying and saying over and over, he took her, he took her, he took her. And the he that Therese was referring to was Venus's estranged, soon-to-be ex-husband, Douglas Stewart. So he talks to Larry because Larry's a little bit more composed at this time. And Larry tells the officer that Venus and her ex, soon-to-be ex, were having some problems. They had a tumultuous relationship. She had left him. And he said that just the day before Venus disappeared, she was sitting down with her father and she was telling him that she was worried he was going to come and get her and kill her. So clearly in the beginning, Doug seemed like a great place to start for a couple of reasons. First, it's always the husband, right? And in Venus's case, she had literally been telling people that she thought that the husband was going to come and kill her, and now she was gone. And you add the fact that she and he had a bad relationship, that she had recently left him. It seemed like a great place to start. So they go and they talk to Doug, and he has an alibi. And they confirmed that the alibi was legit. He had been out to eat. He had called his boss. He had gone into his attorney's office and had made a payment. So his alibi was solid. So now their biggest lead, the one thing that they thought was going to be like a surefire thing right from the beginning, was turning out to be a dead end. And they knew they were going to have a much harder time of answering the question. And the question was, what happened to Venus Stewart? Now, before we get into that, before we get into what happened to Venus, before we get into the investigation, I want to talk about who Venus was and her life leading up to her disappearance. Venus Rose McComb was one of 3 children born to her parents, Larry and Therese, and she was born on August 4th, 1977. Venus was her mother's baby dude. First off, she was the youngest, so that automatically makes her not more special, but it's a little baby. It's her mother's last baby. And before she was even born, her mother said she'd dreamt about her, picturing this little girl with these big brown eyes. And she said that when Venus was born, she immediately loved her so much, an indescribable amount of love. Growing up, Venus is said to be a really sweet girl, to the point that maybe she might have been even a little bit naive because she just trusted everyone, even people that didn't deserve her trust. But that didn't seem to affect her life when she was younger, at least. She had friends. She went on to graduate from Bronson High School with the initial plan of being a veterinarian, but she found out that that wasn't the right path for her because she realized that she'd never be able to operate on animals, which I feel like is such a relatable statement for so many of us. At least I know it is for me. I know that I had the exact same thing. I was like, I want to be a vet. And then I was like, oh, but sometimes that looks ugly. And I was like, I can't do it because I couldn't hurt an animal. And that was Venus too. So she pivoted and she ended up taking classes and graduating from West Michigan University with a degree in criminal justice with the plan to be a cop, actually. But again, she realized that that wasn't for her because she found out and came to the realization that she hated guns, which again, relatable to me as well. I'm not a fan of guns. So she's 24 by this point. Her life is just getting started when she meets a guy named Doug. And how this came to be is one of Venus's friends knew that Venus had a soft spot. Her weakness was a man in uniform. And her friend's name was Jamie. Jamie had a brother named Doug who was in the Marines. He was a man in uniform. So she decided to set up like a group date where everybody could hang out together. The two met. They hit it off. And when I say they hit it off, they really hit it off. Within like 4 dates, they were married. He said that she was beautiful and smart and articulate, and that their meeting was the exact definition of love at first sight. Now, Venus's family was, of course, a little shocked. Their little baby had ran off and gotten married to some guy that she just met that they had never met. So they were a little bit hesitant. But once they met, it didn't seem to worry them that much. He just kind of fit in with their family pretty well. He became good friends with her brother, which was important. I guess they were both really outdoorsy, so they'd go hunting, they'd go fishing. They just became buds. And it was important. It was important that he fit into her family so well because Venus was very close with her family, with her mother being like her best friend. So the two are married, and about a year after the two got married, Doug decided to leave the Marines. I guess this was Venus's request. He had been looking at like different places he could go on deployment, and she was so worried that, something bad would happen to him, and she didn't want that. She wanted him home with her. So he left, which I didn't know was a thing. I kind of thought that if you were in like any branch of the military, that you were just kind of in it until they told you to leave. But it turns out that I know nothing of the military. So he was able to just leave, and they were going to start their lives together, with one another. They moved into a house in Michigan, and they both got jobs. Venus got a job at a bank in the fraud department where apparently she worked for like years, and he got 2 jobs. He was working at a Applebee's and a Pizza Hut. From there, time marched on, and they went on to have 2 kids. They had 2 daughters, which was apparently Venus's dream. She really wanted to be a mother, and her family said that she loved these kids. She lived for these kids. Everything she did was for the girls, to the point that after they were born, she even had plans to go back to school, even though she had already done her schooling. She wanted to go back to school so she could make an even better life and be an even better example for her 2 daughters. Doug, however, was not as motivated as Venus after the girls were born. So when the girls were born, he was the one who ended up being a stay-at-home dad because, Venus had the better paying job, and like somebody's got to do it. If you have the luxury of somebody making enough so somebody can do it. But in this situation, Doug was the one that did it. And the plan had always been that eventually, once the girls were a little bit bigger, they could, they weren't literal infants, that he would get a job and then they'd figure out their schedules so that they could both work, bring in more money, etc. But what ended up happening is that Doug seemed to get a little bit lazy. He didn't want to go back to work. He was much more interested in just playing video games. And this caused a lot of fights. This caused a lot of tension. And eventually they just started fighting all the time and breaking up and getting back together and breaking up and getting back together. Now, despite them having these problems and breaking up and getting back together, they wanted to work it out. They wanted to stay together and be a family. So they decided that what would be best for them would be a big move to uproot their lives and completely change things. So Newport News ended up being the place that they wanted to call home, a place where there would be lots of fun and excitement nearby all the time for them and the kids. And I guess Venus chose the place that they moved, and she actually chose several places. She chose different places in different states, different cities, all that had fun things that they could do together as a family nearby. Doug said that the choices were either Williamsburg, Virginia, because there was Busch Gardens, Miami, Florida for Disney World, or Houston, Texas for SeaWorld and Six Flags. So they ended up in Newport News, which was 30 miles from Virginia Beach and 20-ish miles from Busch Gardens. So they were right in the middle of everything they could ever want, and so that their girls could have the best childhood possible. And it seems like they took advantage of it, because you can actually see home videos of this. There's an episode of Dateline where they covered this case, and in it you can see home videos of them at Busch Gardens. And Doug said that they would go to Busch Gardens as a family like 2 to 3 times a week. The change of location seemed, at least to Doug, his accounts of it, to be like a really good thing for their relationship. He said the couple was getting along better, that the kids seemed happier. He got a job as a truck driver, and they moved into this tall, like skyscraper apartment building that Venus wanted to live in. He remembers this time as the best time. They had been together for 8 years, and he said this was the best year of their marriage. But if that was true, then how come just a year after moving into this new apartment, she decided she was done? She grabbed her girls and she left. She just left him when he was not home, and drove the 700 miles back to her family's house in Michigan to move in with her parents and get a divorce. Well, the answer to that question is, it seems that she was afraid of Doug, because she even tried to get a restraining order against him. And in that order, she wrote, quote, "I am scared to death, and every day I live in constant fear. I am constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering when he will appear again." And reportedly, she had reason to be afraid of him because, they're in a legal battle at this point with the kids and everything. So she had a divorce attorney, and she had gone to the divorce attorney, and she had the paralegal there transcribe, I believe it was a voicemail, it was an audio recording from Doug to her, where he said one of the ways that he could deal with her was getting his father's .357, which, is a gun. So the paralegal transcribed this for her, gave her a copy of it, and told her to keep it in a safe place. Now, they were again in a custody battle because she had left with the girls, and, he wanted custody of them. So they were fighting for custody of the girls. And Venus, just a week before she disappeared, was given temporary custody of the girls because she told the court that Doug was abusing his daughters in a very specific and very terrible way that I'm sure we can all put together in our heads. So because of this, she was given emergency custody, and there was going to be a hearing to determine what was going to happen. That was going to be like a more permanent solution. As I'm sure you can imagine, Doug was very upset. He was upset about all of this. 2 months before she disappeared, she leaves him. 1 week before she disappeared, she gets, full custody of the girls. Now we're back to the point where police are at Venus's parents' house the morning she disappeared, and they're looking at the scene. They're taking everything in. They're gathering evidence as one does. And her parents are there helping police by pointing out anything that seems out of the ordinary, since they lived there and knew, how things should be. Now, the signs of the struggle in the yard, the rocks being strewn about, the drag marks, all of that was pretty obvious. The cop could have come to this conclusion himself, I am sure. But in addition to that, Larry, Venus's dad, pointed out that in an area near his propane tanks and his pontoon boat, there was the wrapper for a tarp. And it wasn't their trash. So the cop's like, I should put a rock on this so it doesn't blow away in the wind. Because remember, he's just Trooper Aaron. He's not like a crime scene tech. So he puts that there so that later it can be gathered as evidence, which ended up being a good thing because they do end up pulling a fingerprint from this wrapper later. Anyways, at this point, Trooper Aaron's like, we need to get more people out here. So he calls in for backup. He gets police doggos. He gets aviation support, Marine Patrol, because I don't know if I mentioned this, but they literally lived on a river, and crime scene techs. They bring in all the big guns and started, to process the scene, which is when they got that fingerprint off that tarp, which they did determine, by the way, this tarp was from Walmart, which does end up mattering. So keep that locked away for later. Now, as I said, the very first place they wanted to look, or rather the first person they wanted to speak to, was Doug, because of the whole volatile relationship and all that, and the whole like 357. They're like, that doesn't seem good. So they go to him and they speak to him, and he gives him his alibi, right? He gives them a whole rundown of where he had been, all places that were in Virginia, like nowhere near where Venus was abducted from. And one of the places specifically that he put down for his alibi was his attorney's office. And he said his attorney wasn't there, but the paralegals were. So that right there would make it an easy thing to look into, right? These are people who can confirm whether or not he was there. So Virginia police do that. They go to the they go to the law firm. The paralegals are there. They go to the law firm. They speak to the paralegals, and they confirm that, yes, during the time that they're asking about, he was there. He came in and he made a payment towards the child custody battle that he was in with Venus. And that was that. Well, actually, that wasn't that, because they also were able to recover surveillance footage from his apartment complex in the parking garage that showed he was in Virginia at the time Venus went missing, 700 miles away from Michigan. So it could not have been him. So with that, police had to look into other leads. And they did actually have other leads that they could look into, because several people came forward and said that they had seen a man, like a shirtless man, who was soaking wet, asking people for cigarettes near the lake. And he had stood out to people. So that's why they brought it to police's attention. And police look at this and like, Venus lived near the lake. This guy who made people feel odd was wet near the lake. Could he have put her in the lake? Is basically the mindset that they're working with, right? So they look into it. They even make a composite sketch of this dude, but it never ended up going anywhere. So I don't know what that guy was all about. Maybe he was just swimming and needed a smoke. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. But they looked into it and it didn't go anywhere. In the meantime, though, they had to just keep looking for Venus before they could figure out what happened to her. Or while trying to figure out what happened to her, they had to try to also find her. There were dogs and helicopters, friends and family members, and they searched everywhere they could think of, followed every lead. I think it was Venus's aunt who just kept a shovel in her car in case anything ever came up. But notably and frustratingly, Doug was never there. He was never at any of these searches for his missing wife. Now, his reasoning for this, his reasoning he gave for not searching for her, is that he didn't believe she was missing. He thought that she had voluntarily left. He believed that once she got full custody of the girls, the seriousness of being like a sole parent got to her, and that she just ran off not being able to handle it. And he said that this wasn't like the first time she had ran off on him, because when she initially left him, she didn't tell him she was leaving. And so he ended up going to the police department and trying to file a missing persons report for her, just to find out that, you know, she had dipped on her own, and even put in a complaint against him. So he was like, she's done this before. She may be doing it again. So I'm just kind of hanging back, watching the news, hoping for the best, and just waiting for her to come back. But his reasoning wasn't like vibing with everyone, including police. They always felt weird about him, even though he had an alibi. So they even like went and talked to him again, like a second time. And this time it was police from Michigan and police from Virginia who went and spoke to him. And when they went, he just told them the same thing that I just told you, what his theory was, that she just left on her own. And he was reportedly super helpful during this interview. Like, they wanted, I think they had a search warrant for all of his computers and stuff. And he's like, no problem. And showed him where all of the computers were, like gave them over voluntarily. And they were also able to search his truck. They did find some stuff in the truck that was very useful, like a receipt to Walmart, where he purchased a hat, some gloves, a shovel, and a tarp. Like the tarp that was found at Venus's parents' house, the wrapper that was found at Venus's parents' house after she disappeared. Now, this receipt from Walmart, another thing about it, besides the items he purchased that was interesting, was that it was from the night before Venus went missing, and it was in Ohio. But he had an alibi that put him in Virginia at that time. So how could that be? That's the question here. Well, okay. When police found the receipt, the date on the receipt was actually smudged. So even though you and I now know that it was the day before Venus went missing, at the time, police didn't know. But they needed to figure it out because it was significant, because Ohio is on the way from Virginia to Michigan. So it would be like a place he would stop on the way if he was leaving his house and going to where Venus was. So they needed to go to this Walmart, talk to people, figure out all they could, figure out when it came from, when the receipt was printed, when the purchase was made. There you go. And once they did, once police looked into this, they were able to quickly pick his alibi apart, because it was clear to them at this point he was not in Virginia, even though his alibi put him in Virginia, and he couldn't be in two places at once. So what was going on? But I'm ahead of myself a little bit here. So let's backtrack. Police go into Walmart because they want to speak to people there, see if they can confirm he was there. And not only were they able to speak to people who remembered him, they were also able to get surveillance footage from the Walmart to prove that, yes, he was there. And they were able to speak to several employees who remembered specifically talking to him. And they remembered him because this outfit, he wore an outfit, and I just do not understand why he would make this choice, because it was very loud. It was very like, remember me. He was wearing this mismatched outfit, the bottoms of which were, it was like a collared shirt, and the bottoms were this like bright Hawaiian swim trunk. Like, why would that be your choice of items to wear if you're trying to not stand out. That was a choice that I don't understand. So anyways, they talked to the employees who again easily remembered him because of the outfit, because one, the outfit was loud as hell, and two, it was cold as hell at that time and he was in shorts and like a t-shirt. And one employee even remembered specifically that he asked for lye, you know, the thing that's used to put on like bodies to cover up a smell. And the lady who worked there was like, no, we actually just like don't sell that here. But the point of all of this, the point of everything that I'm telling you is that police were able to prove that Doug was in Ohio, which is on the way to Michigan, where Venus went missing from. So the night before she went missing, he's on his way towards Michigan. But it doesn't make any sense because he has an alibi that puts him in Virginia, including video surveillance that puts him in Virginia. So how can he be on video in 2 different states at the same time? That's what they have to figure out now. So police are looking into that. They're looking into it as an alibi and they're tearing it apart. But in the meantime, life goes on. Venus is still missing. And you remember, there's a custody battle that was in effect when she went missing. And Doug, he's like, you know what? I'm going to go and I'm going to get my kids. Because at this time, the kids are in the care of Venus's parents. And they suspect he's involved. They always thought that he was involved. So they were like, you are not getting near those kids. But they are his kids. So he goes to the court and he's like, listen, I'm the dad. I'm here. Their mom, she's just gone. So I should get those kids. But luckily, the court disagreed and he wasn't even given visitation. And her family, man, of course, they were thrilled when he wasn't even given visitation because they knew he was involved and they had already been through so much shit in addition to Venus going missing. For example, someone called Venus's grandfather, her grandpa. And when he got the person on the line, the person just kept saying, I'm sorry, Grandpa. I'm sorry, Grandpa. And Doug didn't do this. And police looked into this and they believe, they don't know if it was related to Doug specifically, but they believe this was just a prank call, which is so fucked up because her grandpa said that it sounded like her at first, but then it didn't sound like her and he was confused. And I'm just like, who the fuck prank calls a family? You know, we know this happens all the time, but how could somebody actually do that? Prank call a grieving family and pretend to be the person who's missing? You need to have your head examined. And another thing that happened in the time that she was missing that is just so, her poor family. So her dad gets this phone call from the apartment complex that Venus and Doug had lived at together, the one that she had left. Okay, remember that skyscraper? So by this time, Doug had moved out of his Virginia apartment and he actually moved back to Michigan after Venus went missing. And I believe he was staying with his parents. I don't know why he did this. Maybe to be closer to his kids. I really couldn't say. But he leaves. And the apartment people call Venus's dad. And they're like, hey, when Doug left, he left all kinds of stuff here, like your daughter's things and your granddaughter's things. Would you like us to pack this up and mail it to you? This guy, Doug, literally left all of his wife and kids' stuff. Like, how does that, sir, make you look innocent when that's what you're trying? That's like the vibe you're trying to give off. This doesn't make you look innocent. But either way, Venus's dad's like, no, like, don't mail it to me. I will just drive down and pick it up myself, which was such like a heart-wrenching experience for him. But at the same time, it was heartwarming because he got to meet so many people that really cared about Venus and these girls. It's just so fucked up, man, to be sitting there and wondering where your daughter is, having no idea where your child is, and to have all this happen and to have him be so disrespectful towards your daughter's things and your granddaughter's things, and then to have him trying to get the kids and knowing full well in your gut that this guy has something to do with why she's gone. And police believed it too, right? They believed that it was bullshit. His alibi, they thought it was bullshit. They thought that he was responsible. And they believed that he had an impersonator in his home while he was driving to Michigan. And they said of this quote, obviously that alibi doesn't hold up. So someone was in Virginia, in the Newport News area, in our belief, to provide an alibi. They even put out a statement to the public, basically calling out the person that they believed was responsible, though at this time they didn't know who was responsible, but they said like, hey, if anybody was doing this for him, you will be considered an accessory after the fact, so you might want to reach out to us so you don't get into more trouble. But in the meantime, they decide that the best thing they can do is look into Doug's cell phone records. And in doing this, they found that he had been talking to one person constantly, that either he had been calling this person over and over, or this person had been calling him over and over. And they were calling each other like 10 to 15 times a day. Okay, for the weeks leading up to the murders, 10 to 15 times a day. The day before the murder, radio silence, no communication. Both phones were actually turned off. Then after she was killed, the phones were turned back on and the communication started back up again. The police look at that and they're like, that's weird. That's suspicious. Maybe we should try to figure out who this person is that he's talking to so much, because they may be the key to answering the question. The question being, what happened to Venus? Because this just seems too coincidental to be a coincidence. Right? Cool. So within no time, they're able to link this phone. The person that Doug was talking to was a 20-year-old man named Ricky Spencer who lived in Delaware. Ricky was a college kid from a nice family. His dad owned his own vet clinic. He was taken care of and loved, and he was just a totally normal kid. So police thought it was weird that he and Doug were talking, period, because there's a big age difference. They're in different states. Why do they even know each other? So police decide they're going to head over to Delaware and have a little meeting with Ricky to find out. So police go to his house, and I believe it's his poor mother who answers the door, having no idea what's going on, what they're there for. They take Ricky, they go to the station, they sit him down, and they're like, so, Doug Stewart, how art thou know him? Okay. He tells police that the two met online, that they played Xbox Live together, and that they met about a year ago, and that they played together hours every single day, but they first met in person, for the first time on April 1st, April Fool's Day, during Ricky's spring break, because he was in college, which had to have been a dream for them at the time, because these Xbox Live friendships are a real legit thing. You become friends with the people that you play with online. You start playing all the time. You talk over the headsets, you're buddies. And most of the time, I think it's far more common for these people to never meet and for it to just be kind of an innocent thing. But in this situation, they did get to meet. But Ricky said that their meeting was just a little bit awkward because they were so far apart in age from one another, and they really couldn't relate on much or have much to do together, because Ricky wasn't even 21 yet, so they couldn't go to the bar, go to the club. He said they just went to Busch Gardens a couple times, but it was just a little bit weird. Now, Ricky tells police that that was it. They had that interaction and he hadn't seen him since. But police are kind of I don't know. I get a feeling that's not true. This is what they're thinking in their heads. So they decide to, on a hunch, call his bluff. And they're like, listen, Doug killed his wife, Venus. We know that he killed his wife, and we know that someone, you, Ricky, stayed in his apartment to pretend to be him for an alibi. Thoughts? And it took a little bit of pushing, just a little bit, but it worked. And he cracked, and he admitted to police that he had gone to Doug's apartment, and he had stayed in Doug's apartment pretending to be him, to be his alibi, while he went to Michigan to take care of his wife. And boy, did this guy, Ricky Spencer, have some details. So this is the part where I say that Doug had some ideas, right? So Ricky tells police that what he said in the beginning was true. The two met on Xbox Live. They became friends. He went during spring break and he met up with Doug. And he said at first it was a normal, interaction, a normal visit, but that after a little bit of time, Doug started to bitch about his soon-to-be ex-wife, Venus. And it went from just bitching about her to him saying that Venus was abusive to his daughters. And that on one occasion, Venus had almost killed one of their daughters, but he had been there to stop her. And that he was so scared of what this woman, now that she had custody, was going to do to his kids. He told Ricky, man, I just need to get rid of her. If only I had somebody to give me an alibi, to Ricky. And Ricky was like, no, I'm not going to be doing that. But he said after some prolonged asking over and over, he finally agreed that he would be Doug's alibi so that he could go and murder his wife. And then he told him all about his plans. He was like, listen, I'm not going to shoot her and I'm not going to stab her. You want to know why? Ricky's like, why? He's like, because that leaves evidence. So what you do when you don't want to leave evidence is you choke somebody. You choke them to death. Then while the two were in a park during their spring break hangout the first time they met, Doug demonstrated the type of chokehold he would put on Venus. And Ricky said that as soon as he did it, he was out of breath. He was lightheaded. It was the experience he never had. And he said that Doug told him 10 seconds of that, you're unconscious. 30 seconds of that, you're dead. He told Ricky that his plan was to go to Venus's parents' house in the early morning hours after Venus's parents had left for work and his girls were at school. This was supposedly his initial plan. And he said that he was going to take her, he was going to choke her, and then he was going to bury her in like a pre-planned and pre-dug hole. He said after this visit with Doug during his spring break, he went home knowing full well that Doug was going to contact him when it was time, right? When it was time for the plan to be put into effect. So one day, it's April 15th. He calls him and he's like, hey, the time is nigh. So the two met at a gas station that was like between, I don't think it was like in the middle, but it was like a gas station, a pre-planned place where they could meet up and Doug could give Ricky the items he would need to impersonate Doug. He gave him his bank cards, his keys, a key fob, a prepaid phone, shoes, socks, a hat, hoodie, and these big sunglasses so that he could disguise his face and pretend to be Doug. He told him to avoid as many cameras as possible, but if he was there, hide his face. He told him to use his bank card so that it would look like he was there, and then he was going to go to Michigan and take care of his wife. At that point, the two left, Doug heading to Michigan to take care of his business, and Ricky heading to Virginia. I think he was already in Virginia, but heading to Doug's apartment in Virginia. But he didn't go straight to Doug's apartment. He parked 3 blocks away, which is where Doug had already went and parked his car and left it there so that Ricky could get to the spot 3 blocks away, switch over cars to get into Doug's car, and then drive back to Doug's apartment so it just looked like Doug went somewhere and was coming back in his car. He bought Wendy's with Doug's bank card, a place that Doug chose specifically because he knew that they didn't have outdoor cameras. He then got back to the apartment. He parked in Doug's spot. He went into Doug's house and hung out in his apartment, even called Doug's parents, pretending to have like a sick voice, telling them that he didn't feel well and he was going to be going to bed early. So it seems like Doug really planned this through, but things ended up going wrong. And that's because Doug is stupid. So he was driving to Michigan to go and kill his wife. And on the way, he's weaving in and out of traffic. So at about 4:30 in the morning, he gets pulled over. He gets pulled over in Ohio by a cop while he's on the I-75 headed towards Michigan. Now, as you can imagine, this created a very serious problem because he was pulled over. It was on record. He couldn't then say that he wasn't in that area because if they started investigating him when his wife went missing, they're going to be like, so why were you in an area that was on your way to where she was, right? So the plan was off. So he calls Ricky and he tells him this. He tells him what happened. He told him the plan was off. He told him to go ahead and leave, but to mail him back his, phone, his key fob, his keys, all that jazz, but to make sure to take the track phone with him so that when, he wants to try this again, he can get in contact with them. And with that, Ricky headed back home to his place and Doug came home and it was like nothing had happened. Now, after a while, after a little bit of time had passed, Doug did reach back out to Ricky saying, hey, I'd like to try this again. But Ricky was like, no, I don't want to be part of this. I already did it once and I didn't want to do it then. I don't want to do this. I'm sorry, but no. But then Doug reportedly started threatening Ricky, not with violence against him, but with just more violence against more people. He said that if Ricky didn't help him, what he was going to do is just go ambush Venus's family, period. He was going to go to the parents' house and he was going to break in and kill every single person there except for his kids, including Venus. So Ricky, saying he didn't want even more blood to be shed, even more people to be hurt, agreed to help Doug again. So with that, the same thing happened all over again. The meetup, the switching up items, him taking his bank card, him going to buy food and, hanging out in Doug's apartment. This time he also did more stuff. He made computer searches on Doug's computer, which would have been linked to his internet. He called Doug's boss at Doug's request to call in sick, pretending to be him. And he even went and made a payment to Doug's attorney for the child custody dispute. And when he did it, Doug told him exactly what lady to go to because he said she was, quote, not right in the head. And he wore that disguise so that when he did it, they wouldn't realize that it wasn't Doug making the payment. Meanwhile, Doug drove to Virginia, avoiding toll roads, paying for gas with cash, and talking to Ricky on their prepaid phone the whole time because they had their actual phones turned off during this time. And that's why when police looked at the phone records, they saw they were talking. And then all of a sudden both phones were off. It's because they were talking with those prepaid phones. So now it's about 7 a.m. the day that Venus went missing, and Doug called Ricky on that prepaid track phone and asked him to get in his cell phone, Doug's cell phone, which he left at home with Ricky, and to get Venus's parents' phone number out of that phone because he didn't write it down for reasons unknown to me. So he gives him that number, and then he tells Ricky to leave the house between 8 and 8:15, but no later than 8:15, so that he, Doug, would be seen on camera leaving his apartment in Virginia at the same time that Venus was being killed in Michigan. He then told him he was gonna go, And if he didn't hear from him by noon, that meant that something went wrong and he was probably on the run. Ricky said that Doug called him at about 8:30 that morning and just said to him, quote, "Okay, dude, it's done." So Ricky asked him, like, what happened? And he told him what he did. He said he had taken that phone number, Venus's parents' phone number, and he had called that number while he was hiding outside the property. Once he got Venus on the line, he disguised his voice and said he was a mailman so that he could get her to come out because there was like a gate around the property, and that was the only way he was going to have access to her. He was hiding, dressed totally in dark clothing, just waiting for her to come out. And as soon as Venus was close enough, he jumped out and he grabbed her. He said there was a slight scuffle with her trying to fight him and she let out one scream, but he was able to get her in that headlock and subdue her. And he said just one drop of blood fell from her nose, and that was it. Ricky then asked him if it was worth it. And Doug said that if he was able to keep his kid safe, then it was. And then he told him that he would call him back a little bit later because now he was going to bury Venus. From there, Ricky continued to pretend to be Doug, getting food at Wendy's again, going to a movie before finally hearing from Doug again. Doug told him that he had stopped at a rest area where he had showered, got rid of his clothes, and stole someone's license plate and put it on his truck so that now he could go through toll roads. Which it's like, because now obviously he wants to get home as quickly as possible so he could be like, look, I'm here. So him and Ricky decide they're going to meet at Bethesda, Maryland, at I think that's how you pronounce it. If you're from there, let me know. Bethesda sounds more correct. I don't know though. They meet at a mall there where they exchange things, and that's sort of it. They go their separate ways. But before they went their separate ways, when all was said and done, Ricky started to get nervous. He started to get scared because he was the one person who knew what Doug did. So he asked him, like, are you going to kill me now? And he said that Doug just laughed at him like it was just the most ridiculous thing he'd ever heard and told him no, but did tell him to keep his mouth shut because he said that if the cops came sniffing around and he got into trouble, Ricky would get in just as much trouble as him for helping him. So investigators are hearing all of this from Ricky, and I have to imagine that their jaws were on the ground because remember, they had a hunch. They had a hunch that Ricky may be involved, but they had went with that hunch and it had paid off in an ultimate way. So they were like, oh shit, we got him. Because they had always suspected that Doug was involved. Everyone thought Doug was involved. So when he had an alibi, they were like, that's super weird because it seems for sure like this guy did it. So now they knew this guy did it. And they promptly went and arrested him. I believe he was at a convenience store. I could be wrong there, but I think it was. And they arrested him. They charged him with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Now, when her parents found out, they were just broken because now they knew that she was dead, that he was being charged with her murder. So all that hope that they had been holding on to, right? They were hoping for the best and expecting the worst, but now this was the worst it could possibly get. They just had such a hard time accepting that he could actually kill her. Like they thought it, but to know that he could kill her. And then they didn't even have a body, so it was just very difficult to deal with. And speaking of no body, so they arrested Doug and they were fully prepared to pursue him, take him to trial, all of that on a murder case with no body, which we know is not an easy thing to do. It is actually kind of rare. We've covered cases where it's happened, but in the vast majority of murders, that is something that they don't typically even try. That's why when it finally happens, it's such oh my gosh, they're doing a murder no body case. But they felt like they had a strong enough case against him. They had the people in Walmart who remembered seeing him in Ohio when his alibi put him in Virginia. They had the receipt for the tarp that was purchased in Doug's vehicle, which was from Ohio when he should have been in Virginia. And they also had the wrapper from the tarp, remember, that was found in Venus's parents' yard that had, spoiler alert, Doug's fingerprint on the wrapper. And they had Ricky. And they had his confession. And it wasn't just his confession. They were able to corroborate the things he said by going back and looking at phone records and also video surveillance. Because remember, he had tried this before. So they were able to even go back to April 15th and see that Doug was on video camera at his house and going about his business doing things, Ricky, and that Doug was in Ohio being pulled over by police. So again, how's he in two places at once? All it did was corroborate Ricky's testimony. And I say testimony because they weren't able to just use his confession. Ricky actually made a plea deal, an agreement with the prosecution where he would testify against Doug actually at trial, would face him with all of this information in exchange for a lighter sentence for him. Now, because Ricky was put up there by the prosecution, the defense, of course, had to try to tear him apart and make him look as bad as possible on the stand. But they didn't do it super effectively, in my opinion. Like, they brought up his Xbox handle, which was Dark Bukkake, and they made him explain to the court what a bukkake was, which I'm not gonna explain here. You're more than welcome to Google it, but if you do, don't look at photos. But they were basically just trying to make him seem like an unsavory and morally corrupt individual. But, I mean, he's a 20. He's a young man. He just looks like a dirty young man. But that was kind of it. Like I said, they didn't really try very hard to discredit him. He was only cross-examined for like 20 minutes because the account that he gave really couldn't be picked apart. All they wanted to do was let the jury know that he had been given a plea deal in exchange for this testimony, and that the defense believed that police were railroading Doug to make him look guilty, and that they had fed Ricky all this information in order to make their case. That none of this happened and police told him what to say. Which, I mean, I guess is the only tactic the defense really could go with. Because if you think about it, if everything that Ricky is saying is true, why would Ricky, this young kid with no criminal history, participate in helping somebody get away with a murder? He would have to be morally bankrupt in order to do something like that. And if he was, in fact, morally bankrupt, could that mean that he was lying about everything and police had fed him this information and that he was just doing it to sort of save his skin? But at the same time, if he had nothing to do with it and he was just, put up to it by police, why would he even help at all? Like, what would be the point? But basically what it came down to is Ricky said the reason that he helped Doug, because why would he do this? That's a very serious question. It's just because he truly believed that Venus was hurting the girls and he didn't want kids to be hurt. This is what he said. Even though we know Venus was a great mother. Venus never hurt those girls. Ricky didn't know that. He only knew the version of Venus that Doug showed him. He said that Doug was very convincing in what he said about Venus. He said that Doug said that if he didn't kill Venus and she got to keep the girls and anything happened to those girls as a result, that he was going to lose it. He was going to go on a rampage, a killing rampage. And then he got detailed with it. He said that he would kill Venus. He'd kill her family. He'd kill the judge who gave her custody. He'd kill the attorneys who took part in getting her custody. He'd kill the jury. He'd kill everyone. And Ricky believed that he would. He said he agreed to help Doug, but the entire time he was hoping that Doug would change his mind and wouldn't go through with it. And the defense was like, well, listen, he didn't go through with it. He didn't do it at all. What the prosecution has is an illusion of evidence, and they haven't even proven that Venus Stewart is dead. But, it wasn't just Ricky's testimony that the prosecution had, right? They had so many other things that corroborated the testimony. They showed the jury the surveillance of Doug at Walmart buying not only the tarp and shovel, but it also showed him on a previous trip buying the track phones. They had security footage from around the same time that showed, quote, Doug in his apartment. They showed the jury that, just like Ricky said, Doug had been pulled over by police on his initial trip to Michigan, which again just corroborated Ricky's story. They had Ricky's mother who testified that she had found the receipt from when Ricky had mailed Doug's items back to him after the first, attempt on Venus's life. And she was able to find this because Ricky had been using his parents' car when he was driving from Delaware to Virginia to help Doug. They also had Doug's employer or supervisor who had taken the call when Ricky had called in sick to make an alibi for Doug when he went to kill Venus. And the person said that, yeah, there was a phone call, but the person on the other end of the line didn't really sound like Doug. It sounded like somebody changing their voice, and that they sounded agitated and hurried. The woman at the law firm also testified, and she said that she had met Doug several times, but the day that Doug came in to pay his bill, she couldn't confirm it was him. She said the person who came in was wearing large sunglasses and a hoodie pulled all the way over his face. So really all you could see was the mouth and the jaw. And she said that in hindsight, it didn't really look like Doug, that this person looked to be about 25 pounds lighter than Doug. And when you look at them, are they similar looking? I don't really think so. They're both white. And I guess maybe you could think that two white guys are the same, but I don't think they look that similar at all. Now, all of that sounds like plenty, right? But wait, there's more. They also had the fact that there were tire tracks consistent with Doug's truck that were found near Venus's parents' house after she went missing. There was also a mixture of DNA found on the sunglasses that Ricky said he wore to disguise himself as Doug. There were Doug's sunglasses, and the DNA mixture was both Ricky and Doug's DNA, and they found what appeared to be a blood stain in Doug's truck. So with that, after 2 weeks of trial, the jury was sent to deliberate, and after just 3 hours of deliberation, they had come back with their decision. They had found Doug Stewart guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. And once the verdict was read, Doug made a statement to the court where he said, quote, "All I have to say is I'm innocent. I did not do these crimes. I ask police to continue looking for my wife. If not for me, my children need to know what happened to their mother." With that, Doug Stewart was subsequently sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. Now, her family, they had like mixed feelings about this. Of course, they're happy to put this portion of this hellish experience behind them. They're happy he's in jail, but they're still heartbroken. And Venus's brother, Dustin, made a statement in which he said, quote, "I can't believe he would hurt me and my family this way. We haven't done anything to him. And then for him to sit here and say he's innocent when all the phone calls and everything lined up was exactly what happened." But Doug denied it still, actually putting the entire thing on Ricky. He even went as far as writing a 2-page letter to like a news outlet, a news publication, where he said that Ricky Spencer was responsible for the murder of his wife. And now because of Ricky, his kids were left without a mother and a father. And, you know, speaking of Ricky, because I realized that I mentioned he took a plea deal, but I didn't get into the specifics. Well, he was the state's witness, right? He was their like star witness, though they did say they believed they'd be able to get Doug behind bars with or without Ricky's testimony, which maybe, but I don't know. It kind of seems like they needed it. But anyways, Ricky did make a plea deal. And in doing so, he pled guilty to conspiracy to commit manslaughter and was given just 1 year in jail for the part that he played. And then he was released in March of 2012 after serving just 8 months in jail. Now, her family was pissed. Like, obviously, they wanted Doug in jail, but they felt like Ricky deserved more time because he could have said something and he could have saved her, which is true. But the state basically justified their plea agreement with saying that they believed it was fair when they took into account what he did and the fact that he helped police so much. So that's his situation. Ricky's like out, right? He's out of jail. He's living his life and people are not happy about it. And one of those people that aren't happy about it is Doug. He ended up giving an interview after he was convicted, and the interview was included in that Dateline episode that I watched, which I believe is on Peacock, by the way, in case anybody wants to watch it. And in this, he said that he was wrongly convicted, and he was wrongly convicted because of Ricky Spencer's testimony. And he said that everything Ricky said was a lie, and he didn't understand his testimony at all. He said that Ricky was just some random guy that he barely knew who one day showed up at his house unannounced. He didn't invite him there. His friends were just saying they were going to be going to the area so they could go to Busch Gardens, and he just showed up, and that Doug was kind of like, okay, I guess you could stay here. But he said he in no way conspired with Ricky to murder his wife. He said that he was frustrated. He was frustrated by the whole situation, and he was frustrated by the trial, not just because he was wrongly convicted, which sucked if it was true, right? That would suck. But also because the trial didn't give him the answers he wanted. He had questions that he wanted answers to, and he wanted to know what happened to his wife, but he never found that out. And he said he was doing this interview after being found guilty because he wanted to bring attention to it and to tell police to keep looking because they hadn't found the right answers. Now, he did, of course, end up appealing his conviction, which we see often in cases like this. And he said he did so on the basis that part of Ricky's testimony against him was inflammatory in nature and prejudiced him in the eyes of the jury, specifically the part where he said that Doug said that he would go on a rampage and kill everybody, including the jury, but he wasn't talking about the murder trial. Like, Ricky wasn't saying that Doug was saying he was going to kill everybody involved in the murder trial. He was saying he was going to kill everybody involved in the custody battle. Now, this was brought up at trial. Like, when Ricky said this, the defense did try to object and all of that. But it was made clear that this was about the custody trial and not the murder trial. So the judge just told the jury to disregard that portion of the testimony. But Doug was basically saying in his appeal that it should have been a mistrial right then and there. But the appeals people disagreed and they denied his appeal. And actually, since then, all of his appeals have been exhausted. I don't believe he can appeal anymore at this point. Now, from there, Doug sat in jail and he continued to say that he was innocent. Meanwhile, her family and her friends and his family, some of his family members, just had to go through life the best they could, however they could without her, you know what I mean? But they still looked for her, and her parents, so sad, refused to move from their house because they believed that Doug had buried her nearby. They did everything they could to find her, with her mother even going on Dr. Phil to try to get more attention brought to Venus's case, a decision that she seriously regrets because the stress from that experience was not worth the outcome that they got as a response. Like the exposure was basically nothing. It did not help Venus's case. Basically, Dr. Phil had her there with some psychics who were getting like information wrong, and Dr. Phil told her that she was obsessed with the fact her daughter was murdered and that basically she kind of needed to let it go for Venus's kids' sake. He basically told her, like, they don't have a mom, they don't have a dad, all they have is their grandmother who is haunted by what happened to her daughter, and you're basically associating all your grandchildren's memories of their mother with pain. Which, I don't know, maybe that's a true statement, but I don't think it's what she needed to hear. Maybe it is what she needed to hear, but not what she wanted to hear. I really don't know. I couldn't say because I'm not in that situation. But it was just hard, man. It was just hard for them because they knew she was out there and they were so desperate for answers. And so many people tried to help. Like, they got reached out to by a number of psychics, which we see in these cases all the time. And one of these psychics was named Gail. She came down from Indiana, and she said that she would stand in the middle of the street making strange noises until she could, quote, feel the vibrations of Venus's lingering presence, hoping to follow that electricity to her body. Which, I don't know, she's one of those people who, like, apparently does this for a lot of cases and does it for free. That she was just one of many who said they had feelings, visions, dreams. But none of the psychics who reached out to Venus's family were successful in helping find her. The family even went as far as hiring a PI. Speaking of all the things that they tried here, they tried to hire a PI, or they did hire a PI. And basically, he just kind of gave them places to look, places they could search, but they didn't really have answers either. But they did search, right? They conducted hundreds of searches for Venus in so many places. Her aunt said that they read books, did training exercises and research. They scoured rivers and creeks and did searches in Michigan and Indiana. They were able to use, I guess, Doug's cell phone records from when he would call Ricky to tell him that he was done, like when he called Ricky to tell him he was done. And they searched all around the area in places he was known to go four-wheeling. They took tips and knocked on people's doors and handed out flyers with photos of Venus, just begging for any information they could have to bring her home. And speaking of these flyers, listen. Doug's parents went around town after Venus's family would go and put these flyers up, and they took them down. I saw a video of this, of a confrontation between Doug's parents and a family friend of Venus's who had caught them going around and taking down the signs after the family put them up. And Doug's mom, I'm sorry, she was, I don't know her, I'm sure this is very difficult for her, but she was real, I want to say, but I'm going to say condescending. She was incredibly condescending to them and was like, oh, just so you know, we recently spoke to Doug and he's great. He's fantastic. And the friend's like, from prison, a murderer? And she's like, you know, he hopes you guys find her, but if you really want some answers, you should talk to Ricky. And it just made me so mad. But then it also made me sad because there's also a video of them confronting Doug's dad. And his dad is handling it differently. He just seemed heartbroken. Honestly, everyone in the interaction just sounded heartbroken. So I guess there were different flyers that were put up with different things. And one of them said that Doug was a murderer, right, on the flyer. And his dad was like, listen, I left all the ones up that didn't say this, but the ones that say he's a murderer, the ones that say these nasty, nasty things, these are the ones that I'm taking down. And they were like, listen, he was convicted. He was convicted. Please, we don't want to fight with you. We don't want to fight with you for your granddaughters. Please just understand that he did this. It was just very sad. And his mom, you know, she did try to justify her actions, saying that, like what her husband said, they only took down the flyers that said the nasty things about their son. They said the ones that were just looking for Venus, they left up, but they couldn't leave up the ones that were calling their son a murderer because they didn't believe it was true. They didn't think that Doug had killed Venus. They actually didn't even believe that Venus was dead because that's what Doug had been saying. Now, that's not to say that Doug's entire family believed he was innocent because that's not the truth. They didn't. So basically what happened is for years after Venus went missing, there was a rumor or this idea that was circulating in the back of people's mind that Doug had buried Venus on his sister Jamie's property after he killed her, because shortly after Venus went missing, Jamie had poured a new concrete floor. I believe it was like in a barn. That part doesn't matter. A new concrete floor was poured. So they were like, oh, he could have buried her under that. Concrete's put, she's gone forever. So years after Venus went missing, police did come to her property and they searched with like ground penetrating radar, and they were able to determine that Venus wasn't buried there. But this whole thing was super hard for Jamie. Hard because people like believed that he would have buried Venus's body on her property, which implies they could think that she could have been involved because she put that concrete floor, but also hard for her because her brother, who she introduced to Venus, was in jail for murdering her, and Jamie, believed that he did it. Jamie had always wanted to reconnect with Venus's family after all was said and done, but she felt so hurt and like guilty just being associated with Doug in that way that she had written Therese a letter, and she carried it around in her purse for 7 years, too afraid to send it because she was afraid of the rejection of Venus's family wanting nothing to do with her, or of like hurting her all over again just by reaching out, which I totally get because I am the type of person that if somebody I care about is going through something, a lot of times I don't reach out often because I don't want them to be having one moment in their day where they're not thinking about the shittiness that they're going through. And then me reaching out reminds them and they're like, fuck, I was finally not thinking about it. But then sometimes it makes you look like you don't care, but you're just overthinking and caring too much sometimes. And I think that that's what she was going through. But all that's to say is Jamie finally did it. The excavation sort of opened up a bridge for her to have somebody that she could connect with to help her reconnect with Therese. So basically, she was going to have the police be a bridge to Therese for her. And the response she got was not what she expected, but it is what she was hoping for because Therese was open to it. She was open to reconnecting with Jamie. So anyway, a meeting was set up at the detective's office between Jamie and Therese. And when they got there, Jamie just sat there and she cried and she cried and she told her she was so sorry. She was so sorry what Doug did. And Therese hugged her. Oh, I'm going to cry. No. Therese hugged her and was like, I'm sorry for you for what Doug did too. And now that Therese and Jamie reconnected, Jamie could be part of her niece's lives again. Now, all of this plays into what happens next, because you see, we still have some runtime here, and that's because there's more to this case. So now that Venus's family and part of Doug's family were reconnecting, they had a common goal, and that was to find Venus so they could stop feeling the pain that they were in by not knowing where she was. So Jamie, she goes to Doug. His sister goes to him, and she's like, listen, and at this point, by the way, all of his appeals are exhausted. So she goes to him, she's like, listen, we've reconnected. I'm in Venus's family's lives. I'm in your daughter's lives. And we are in so much pain because of what I believe, what I know you've done. We are all in continued pain because you will not let us bring her home. Because at this point, it's been 10 years since her mother, her father, Jamie, the girls, his daughters, they have no idea where she is, and they're still in pain because of this, because of him. So with that, a few months later and a few more visits from police later, because they had already been visiting him, trying to get information out of him, but now they knew that he had a point of weakness because of his sister, Doug confessed. He finally confessed to what he did, and he said of this confession, quote, "When I tell you the story, it is going to make me a monster. I am okay with this because that's what I was 8 years ago. The story is going to make me look bad. I was wretched, cold, and calculated." Now, the police had had a feeling that this was going to happen before it happened because, as I said, they had met him for years. And over the years, his demeanor had changed around the murder. First, completely denying it, 100% not into it. Then he started like talking in hypotheticals, like OJ Simpson, really like if I did it kind of situation. And once, time had gone on and his appeals were totally ran out and he knew that his goose was cooked and he wasn't getting out of there, he thought that maybe he could get something out of being honest. He's going to make it sound like he was so remorseful and wanted to help his family, which maybe part of that's true. I don't know. But part of it was definitely self-serving for sure. So he told police what happened. He told police that he and Venus had been having problems for a while, that she had left him, that she had took the kids, and that she had told the court that he had been abusing his daughters and that had pissed him off. He said around that time he had been talking to his friend Ricky all the time and that it turned into joking about killing her. And from there, it turned into actual planning. He says he went to her parents' house that morning and he hid out by the propane tank. He called, pretending to be the mailman, saying he had a package for her. And when she put in the gate code and she came out, he attacked her and he choked her until she went unconscious and slumped into his arms. And he said at that point, he had second thoughts because he was just looking at his best friend laying in his arms like that and he didn't know what he wanted to do. Despite his reservations, he took her to a secondary location where he had already dug a grave for her, so he knew what he was going to do. He said that she regained consciousness, that they had a conversation that pissed him off, and that he in turn stabbed her to death. He said that he immediately regretted it. He doesn't understand why he did it, and he just can't believe that he did do it. And he said of murdering his wife, and I quote, "It was my fault. I'm going to be in prison for the rest of my life. I switched off reason and looked for solutions, and I chose the worst solution." So he made this confession in early September of 2018, and it would take another 3 months for it to happen, but Doug would finally lead police to Venus's body. He said he had just finally gotten to the point where he wanted to tell his family to take some of that pain away from them. He said that he didn't do it at first because, like everybody else, when he first got to prison, all he was focused on was, how do I get out of here? And he knew the only way he even had a chance was maintaining his innocence. He said the entire time he was just thinking of himself and how he could help himself, and that made things harder for his family and Therese and the kids. And he said he didn't want this burden on his family anymore, or selfishly on himself. And he said he was filled with pain and remorse, knowing that he was hurting more people. But it's like, listen, you say that, but you waited for your appeals to run out before having this attack of consciousness, this attack on your soul and on your heart and feeling so bad, right? So was it really for them? Or is it because you literally had nothing stopping you now because you're not going anywhere? And also you get something out of it, which we're going to get into later. And another thing, he says he's so sorry, right? He regretted it as soon as he did it. As soon as she was gone, he regretted it. But he did joke with Ricky after the fact, saying that he had killed Venus and her dad and laughed about it. And when Ricky was like, oh my God, he was like, just kidding. And Ricky was like, that's not funny. So it's like, you felt bad, you regretted it, but you joke about it. I call some bullshit on you, guy. I don't know. Sounds not true to me. I don't know. But either way, he led police to the body because he says he wanted to make amends. So either way, at least she gets to come home. 8 years, 5 months, and 26 days after the murder, Doug Stewart led police to his wife's grave, which was down a 2-track in Wakeshma, Wakeshma Township. Help? This was about 20 miles southeast of Kalamazoo and 12 miles north of where Venus was last seen alive. It was an area that he was very familiar with because as a teenager, he worked there with his father for his woodcutting business. And it was actually an area that was just 1 mile away from where Venus's family and friends were searching for her. Her family had always wondered when they were looking like how close they had gotten to her, and they had gotten within 1 mile. When he was taken to the scene, he was very sure of where it was. He had left 2 stumps at the site because he said he needed to remember where she had been. And they found her pretty quickly. Like after an hour and a half of digging, 5 feet down, they hit a blue tarp. And I can only imagine being there at this time because it's all these years finally coming to this point. And it was a mixture of new investigators who were working the case, but also older investigators, like people who'd been on the case from the beginning. Even officers who had retired were there to recover her. And then there was just Doug standing right by, watching them recover her. This guy who had been so cocky, so persistent that he was innocent, was now there, showing that he wasn't, showing that he did this, and he couldn't get close to the grave. And I'd like to think this is because he felt bad and he was reliving this, because he said that you remember everything, the smells, everything about what he did to her. And I hope that fucking sucked. I hope that sucked for him. I really do. But I kind of doubt it. Once Venus's body was recovered, they were able to contact Venus's mother and also Doug's sister Jamie to give them this news that was like the best thing that they had done in their career, to be able to give them this closure, because they had met with him every year since Venus went missing, trying to get this information out of him. And they said it was for nothing but the family, that the criminal portion of this case was done. They just wanted to bring her home for the family. Her mom was so happy to find her and to finally have her, but also so just sad because she just didn't want her daughter to be dead. Her family was also unhappy because in order to get this information, they had to make a deal with Doug, which they didn't want to do. They didn't want to give him this power. And he said, he was so remorseful and that's why he did it. But it didn't stop him from giving police a list of demands in exchange for the location. Some of the things that he wanted were rejected, like permission to go to his parents' funerals when the time came. He wasn't allowed to do that, but they did agree to some of his terms, like that he wanted to take part in like a prison dog training program, and that he wanted to teach sign language, I believe it was, to other prisoners. And one other thing that he wanted that they agreed to is that in his unit, for him and his other prisoners, he wanted them to have access to an Xbox in their free time. I shit you not. Where it all began, it also ends. And they agreed to this. They said they agreed to this not because he asked for it, because they don't make deals with prisoners, but because this is something they were already planning to do and that other jails had already done this, which I did not know. This is a thing that prisoners just get to play Xbox. I don't know how I feel about that, but they said it's something they were already going to do, and that the Xboxes are not linked up to the internet, and that they can't play violent video games. So what do you think? What do you think about that? Should prisoners be able to play Xbox? Do you care about that? I used to have this debate all the time when I worked at the law firm, because there was a guy that worked there. He was an attorney that used to be a DA, and he had a very different opinion we would talk about prisoners getting married specifically, and he thought it was a good thing and that they should be able to, and I thought not. And I'm just curious, when it comes to the Xbox, do you think that they should be able to play Xbox or no? But either way, they were able to get Venus's location because of this, and that's great, though her family, her aunt specifically, said that she hates that they had to make a deal with him in order to do it, because this was his last act of control and she didn't want to give him that satisfaction. But they did have her back, so now they could lay her to rest. They had already had a service for her back in 2011. I believe it was on the 1-year anniversary of when she went missing, with them saying at that time that even though her body wasn't there, that didn't mean she wasn't there and they couldn't honor her. But now they actually had her so they could put her to rest in a grave next to her father's. Because sadly, by the time Venus's body had been recovered, her father had already died and never got to have the satisfaction of finding her. He went to his grave not knowing where she was. Therese says that that's what really bothers her, that he never got to enjoy the fact that she was back, that they got her. He never got to see the relief on the girls, her daughter's faces. And that would have been everything to him, because he loves those girls and did everything he could to make their lives as wonderful as he could, just like their mom did. And now he's gone and Venus is gone. And Therese said that bringing her home did bring a bit of closure to her, but that she's never going to be able to get over and recover from losing her daughter, her best friend. And she said of this quote, "I'm just glad it's over with. I can put my baby where I know she's at, and I can take care of her now." And she can take care of her, because Venus's grave is only 2 miles away from where she lives with her granddaughters, Venus's daughters. She said that she's so glad to have the girls with her, that they fill her up, and that she sees so much of her own daughter in her grandchildren. She says that her granddaughters always say that it's so good to be home. Home sweet home is what they call her place. And she says that that is her only goal. She wants to make the house their sanctuary. And it's so sweet, because Therese seems to be incredibly loved by her granddaughters. One of Venus's daughter named Therese her, quote, Michigan hero in a school essay where this poor girl wrote that her mom was gone, that her dad was responsible for her mom being gone, and that her grandmother was her hero because during this time, she took her and her sister in and took care of them. That is just something that no kid should ever feel, should ever know, should ever experience. But because of their own father, she had. How could this guy do that? How could you take a child's mother from them? Does he not realize how valuable a good mother is to a child's life? I could cry. It's so fucked up. It's just so frustrating because I cannot imagine what it would be like to lose anyone you love that way. And for it to be your mother at the hands of your father, that's too much. And I think that the idea of losing somebody you care about so much and having no idea where they were for so long, like Venus's family lost her, is exactly why they tried to bring something positive into the shittiest thing they can do. You know, when we see families who do this sometimes, it's always so amazing. But I think that that's why they created the Venus Foundation. It was founded in 2012, and it's a nonprofit that is dedicated to domestic violence victims, their families, and helping other families find their missing loved ones through a statewide search and rescue organization. They said that doing this in Venus's name and being able to help people with her name has been incredibly valuable. They said they created this foundation to tell Venus's story in a way that doesn't portray her as a victim, and that they want her daughters to be proud. They want her story to live on and her name to live on. And they said if they're able to save just one person, to tell her story and save one person from going through what she went through, then that's a win for them. Because, you know, Venus tried to do what they're trying to help these other women do. She tried to leave. She tried to get away. She was brave and she was strong. And that is what they want her to be remembered for. She was a great person, her mother's best friend, and her daughters seriously missed out on a wonderful mother. But Therese said that Venus is alive in their memories because they talk about her, they think about her, and they live for her every day. And with that, my friends, is the story of the murder of Venus Stewart. I hope you found it informative. I hope I gave you every bit of information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, I just want to thank you for hanging out and remembering Venus with me today. Now, considering everything I told you throughout this video, I want to revisit the question of the day. Well, I have two now, and these are them. 1, do you think the police would have gotten a conviction if Ricky hadn't given his testimony? I know police say they think that they would have been able to get it, but do you think that they would have been able to get it, or do you think that that was necessary? And 2, and this is the most important to me because I just don't get it. How do you think Doug was able to convince Ricky to help him with something like this? Is there something inherently wrong in Ricky as a person? Like, he's out there. Do you think that that's dangerous, or like what? Because I am so confused. But let me know all your thoughts in the comments below because so many of you are so much smarter than me. I've seen it and I'm always amazed. Anyways, guys, before you leave, please don't forget to leave me a comment down below with whatever case you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you know, I have a long list of cases, but whenever you leave me a suggestion, I like to put it on my, I put it on my list. So if I cover it, I can give you a shout out like I did with this case. I love looking into the cases you guys suggest because they're awesome. They're awesome. They're not awesome, but they're often cases I haven't heard of or cases that need more coverage. And I know you're filled with great ideas and great taste. Otherwise, you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below, along with a link to my membership and a link to my merch store. And now with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday. And I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.